Welcome to the HR Dialogues, a show where we discuss HR and the future of work. Today, we've got a very exciting episode lined up for you. I'm speaking to Alexis Crimaldi, and we will be looking at the future of the HR business partner and deep diving into those secrets that nobody ever tells you when you get appointed into an HRBP role. Welcome to the HR Dialogues, where we learn from people practitioners as they navigate the emerging world of work. Alexis, great to have you with us. Introduce yourself to the listeners. Who are you and what do you do?
Thanks so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here. I've been looking forward to this. I'm Alexis Crimaldi, currently an HRBP lead at TikTok, previously at Twitter, and then I spent some time in fashion industry as well as media at NBC, which was one of my favorite roles. Thanks so much for having me. It's a passion.
I must say this has been a topic that I've been looking forward to as well. I know there is a lot of misconceptions about what a BP is and what it does and what does real strategic value look like, and I look forward to unpack that with you. Alexis, to get us started, if we reflect back 20 years or so ago, the HR business partner model or the partnering model was put in place. 20 years on, we are facing a world that is being changed by artificial intelligence, decentralized organizations that are going a lot more digital, and the business partner and what business partnering is has actually changed. So let's start with the basics. When I say, what is business partnering, what jumps to mind and what are we referring to?
Yeah, so business partnering versus the business partners are two very different things. So
Mhm.
I do business partnering as an action in like you are partners in crime with
Yeah.
your business leader. That means like consistently pushing the envelope, experimentation on the BP side. You're really forging and kind of trailblazing in partnership with your leader. So whether that be, as you move along, your kind of C-suite executive or their management teams, really trying to consistently think about like why are we doing what we're doing? Is it working? If it's not
Mm.
working, what role does talent or systems play in that? And I think the most exciting piece of business partnering is I view it is that like you have the keys to the castle. So to me,
Yeah.
it's like you are the one that is to understand kind of the complexity of your verticals, the
Mm.
complexity of the business and the culture in which you're operating, and then the complexity of cross-functional teams and partnerships, et cetera. So to go back to your question, business partnering to me is really understanding and being ingrained enough in the business that you are a true thought partner. You're the right hand to your
Mm.
leadership team. Um, I always can tell when I feel like I've gotten there with somebody. I had one of my most recent business partners, kind of called and was like, "What the fuck happened here, Crimaldi?"
Yeah.
Like, and that's where I know like I had a very clear piece in this, you had a very clear piece
Yeah.
in this, and I am held accountable to my piece, which was a really big one. And
Mhm.
that's how I know we are truly kind of sitting at the table together. And it's not kind of me in the background necessarily facilitating.
There's a couple of really important points that you made that I want to call out and deep dive into them a little bit more. The first one for me is the difference between business partner as a role versus business partnering as an approach. And I think that's very often where, from the get go, we get it wrong from both an HR and a business point of view. Because a business partner as a role is something completely different in terms of what you do versus the approach, which, in my view, is a lot more a way of thinking, a lot more about positioning, and then a lot more about a different scope of work that you need to contribute towards the organization. The second part is almost you share in the highs, but you also share in the lows with your different stakeholders. So you take ownership and accountability with them. Something I struggle with is that some of the language we use as HR, where we say, I'm a support function to the business. You're not really, you are part of the business. There's no real separation in terms of what you need to do. And I think that is a big shift that, partnering brings towards the table as opposed to just the role of HR business partner. So I want to dive into that a little bit around some of the mistakes that we make when we almost use these two things interchangeably. What are some of those things that you've seen in practice that pops up that you would kind of call out?
Yeah. So I actually think if we can take it a step further, I think the delineation here needs to be between HR business partners and the HR manager track. I view it to
Mm.
be, HR kind of starts out the same way, more junior level roles. We go coordinator, generalist, potentially specialist, or you go into kind of that BP track. Or to me, there's a world where we should keep tried and true HR manager roles. I think that businesses have been
Mm.
so eager to implement the business partner. It's sexy. In
Yeah.
theory, it's amazing. I mean, it's kind of it's kind of this, jack of all trades specialization in harnessing your talent, right? So you're constantly trying to figure out like how are we getting the most out of our people? And I think I think we get overzealous in we're not
Mm,
clear what exactly we need, businesses need, so that results to me in kind of two things. One, you hire HR business partners who have kind of that demonstrated strategic kind of
mm,
track record of impact, and they're in roles where they're not set up structurally to kind of do those
yeah,
things, so they're not maximized. They get kind of bogged down in the day to day because structures, again, the work is the work is there, the admin work
yeah,
obviously has to get done, so the structure just isn't quite right. Or you have the alternative where you're actually structured to hire an HRBP, in a true kind of like what I would say to be a really kind of innovative capacity,
yeah.
and you're not exactly sure what kind of soft skills I think are critical
Mm,
for that role. So just because someone's kind of held that HR business partner title, like what are we really looking for? So I would say the approach versus the seat itself is lies in the clear expectations,
mm,
clarity on role, and measurable kind of deliverable impact setup. I think it's really difficult to do because businesses are so nuanced. So I'd be more inclined to make sure that expectations and impact is defined per pillar. Like do whatever you have to do to just get
yeah,
on paper. Like what is this person to deliver? And that's like high level programs. Metric of that would be how much has management effectiveness increased over the course of the year. Just put something in place. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but I think it's the lack of integrity, not in a
mm,
malicious way, in the lack of the HRBP title. It's just fast and loose. It works against us from a VP capacity because anytime you speak to someone about HR, they're like, "Oh
yeah.
wow, HR," and I've always thought it's the coolest space to be in. So yeah, it's really interesting, the perception. But in order to do it, we got to clean it up. Pick a track,
Yeah.
pick a lane, make sure you're clear on what you need. And then you've got to structure, you got to support your BPs. So you got to get the structure in place to do it, which means some operations support. Obvious at this point, to me, some analytics support, depending where you are.
Mm,
Certainly the coordinator kind of day-to-day administrative stuff. If you really want your BPs to be focused on kind of figuring out how
mm.
your frameworks in place that really maximize your talent. And
And that's a mistake I've seen, a couple of times. Organizations go through big HR transformation programs trying to shift into a business partnering model. They either get the mistake where they just change titles, so it's the exact same person that shows up the next day to business, but actually nothing in the real conversation has changed. So I've seen that mistake, and I think titles and our obsession sometimes with at what level does what title play doesn't really yield much benefit to the business. Your point around there has to be administrative support in place in order to play the business partner role. And organizations are too quick to want to shift to the partnering component whilst not yet sorting out that operational layer. And then you do find very experienced people coming in that have played very senior business partnering types of roles at other organizations. And then when they step into what you call a business partner in your organization, it's something they've done a couple of years ago. It's not necessarily something that they signed up for as part of really being that strategic partner to the business. And can't agree more with your third point. Something we at AIHR is very, very passionate about. It's a different skill set. We talk about a different mindset, skill set, tool set, heart set that a partner really needs to have as part of what they bring towards the business relationship. And that is going to be contextually relevant with regards to what that business needs at that point in time. Because I think real partnership looks different if I'm a startup versus, a big global conglomerate. But I think there's certain principles that we can definitely pull through as part of that. So I think if we then build on that a little bit, and Alexis, the world is very different today, either even from the time when I first met you a couple of months ago, with some of the recent developments. And in your view, and I'd love to test your thoughts and ideas on this, why is traditional business partnering almost in a role capacity? Why is that no longer good enough? Why is there an urgency for something different in the HR space?
Sure. Yeah, great question. So I would say AI is definitely a component. We have,
Yeah.
if we're still at a point where we're pulling kind of data in the way that I think we did 10 years ago, that's something to talk about. I think that it's changed in the sense of like sink or swim kind of
Hmm.
way of operating. I think businesses like they can't do what they've always done. It just isn't going to work. So in the tech space, especially, which has been really interesting, you're constantly you're in a war for talent.
Mm.
You have all this talent and you have to figure out what the heck you're going to do with them. And so like naturally the envelope gets pushed, which is amazing, but I do think that can cause some like chaos and kind of disjointed
Yeah.
ways of working. We don't have kind of the paper pushing. It's just not going to get the job done. Or if that's what you need, then I think being really clear
Mm.
that that's the extent of it is critical.
Mm.
If you really want to take your business to the next level, which I think at this point, most companies are kind of at that place, you need a thought partner who's able to understand. I think they've got to understand the market. They certainly have to understand, again, like your business inside and out. So as HR talent gets, I'm torn on this because I think that there is a subset. The HR community is small,
Yeah.
in my view. So especially in a place like New York, like you really start to see the people who come through as continuing to evolve careers are the people that I think are pushers and innovators, and they're
Mm.
not afraid to experiment and take the risks. And I guess my perception on this function in general is I've worked along some of the most badass girls. I mean, and I use girls just because I happen to be the makeup of what my teams have been. But I mean, they're some of the most thoughtful, aggressive,
Mm.
really, really cool people. So what you can't do what you've always done if you want to go where you've never gotten, I guess, is my bottom line. And so for companies again that are ticking along, that might be the right solution. And again, I would encourage that HR manager track away. That's not a business partner. And then, for those that I think are really going to put some resources behind and
Mm.
some muscle behind getting HR departments to a place where they can really be utilized and leveraged the way they should be. Um, you're definitely not going to have just anybody walking through the door. So yeah, I think we're
Yeah.
seeing the evolution of data. Data is going to outrun the people. And so I think it becomes very clear very quickly.
Something I'm excited about is I think, with recent developments in generative AI, other technologies, etc., I think that we are as an HR community finally in a place where we've always had this notion to say, oh, but tech will sort that, self service will sort that. To be very honest, a lot of the stuff that we've kind of in the past proposed that technology will sort out, we didn't quite have the technology that is able to do that in a seamless and in an affordable way. So, on the one side, I think that we are almost entering a bit of a new chapter where it is actually we are going to be in a position to structure the HR function differently and the HR service delivery model differently. But something that you said really resonated with me is that the success of being a true partner or a thought partner, and I really like your terminology when you utilize that, is almost letting go of a lot of things that made you successful in the operational domain, because the responsibilities and the expectations are vastly different between those two elements. And I think we struggle in HR to make that transition to say value now looks different and contribution now looks different. When I was coming through the ranks, I told one of my mentors at some stage to say, it's so strange for me, at the end of the week, I can't tell you how many decks I've built or how many reports I produced or how many queries I have solved. How do I know I had a good, productive week? And that's very different when you start moving into that strategic realm because you're no longer thinking in that time horizon. And, you're kind of should be linking your impact a lot more towards the business outcome component and what that expectation of that leader is at that point in time, and how you supported and how you assisted that. So, I'm excited about the tech stuff. I mean, I'm going to sneak in that question because that's obviously very relevant at the moment, around what do you believe the changes will be? Is it a good thing, the tech that's coming in? Is it going to be a challenge? Is it a challenge for some?
Yes. So I think it can be quite scary, to be honest,
Yeah.
blanket statement. I think it's great in the sense of I think that we need support. If you have manual, but you're just not getting full picture data that I think you can certainly get through AI systems. So I'll use an analytics team that I was
Mm.
kind of moved into a BP space in a past life. I think like that team was able to kind of work in tandem with
Mm.
AI capability. And so you still need humans determining
Mm.
what you're looking for. I think the skill set alone of being able to determine a system for aggregating data is really interesting. Like what kind of data
Yeah.
is going to tell us what story? And so I think that like that's the stuff that I get really excited about, like where AI can assist what we are trying to do and frame in the
Yeah.
intangible requirements of, for example, leadership skills and
Mhm.
capacity. I think that's where it's really exciting. In my view, AI is probably never going to be able to do, obviously, the things that we don't want it to do, which is kind of being able to read the proverbial room and kind of start
Yeah.
to make tangible the intangible, which is one of the most important things that I think BPs do. So, yeah, so I think it's exciting. I think all with all within reasonable moderation. But I do think obviously systems and the evolution of data ability is critical. So
I really believe that there's an opportunity almost to celebrate the humanity components that we bring to the workplace. You've spoken about that, the ability to tell the stories, the ability to connect separate data points together and say, but this is actually what it means in our context for where we are today and what we should be doing. And I think if you really do partner with the business in the way that we've been talking about it today, I actually believe that there's a huge opportunity there for reshaping and reframing what that contribution looks like, collaboratively augmented by technology and enabled through technology. And I think that's such a, it is scary on the one side because it's new, it will require different skill sets. But on the other end, I do believe that there is, a real opportunity to elevate the level of creativity that we bring to the HR table and towards the business and what that's going to mean for them. My question to you, Alexis, is in this world, I do want to delve a little bit into the way that we set up HR models because I often find that that is to the detriment of those that want to partner with the business. There's conflicting tensions, there's conflicting priorities that very often sit within these operating models, that we've had for years and years and years and years. Do we need something new, or is the stuff that we have today working, but we just need to do something different?
I think it's a mix of both. So I think COEs and BPs sitting in two different reporting structures, never going to work. To me, the
Yeah,
most
agreed.
diabolical decision you can make. You have competing agendas. They have expertise, you have boots on the ground. And
Yeah.
so it's constantly like they're kind of creating and you're trying to tailor to your business, which to be honest, wasted time and energy.
Mhm.
I think not to say that you should be reactionary based on what the business needs. So to me, like it when it works really well with the COE partnership, which I'm torn on whether BPs should really be owning kind of that whole component, COE kind of work included.
Mhm.
Again, the framework today doesn't necessarily support that. So COEs and business partners, when it works really, really well, to me, you're co-creating. So basically,
Yeah.
you're in lockstep. You're in conversation with these folks very like frequently throughout your days. You're talking about current challenges. You're anticipating future challenges. You're talking about future opportunities. You're trying to frame kind of what can we provide in a system or framework or learning and development program, et cetera, that will be
Mhm.
able to support kind of either where we are or where we're trying to go. And I think that shows up to me in the way that I think your business kind of feels like you've got the expertise, right? You're sitting at the
Yeah.
CFE, you have, you've been in learning and development for 15 years, you have frameworks that I'm not aware of, but you're able to
Mhm.
kind of help me frame the problem in a different way and create something that I wouldn't have necessarily been able to do, but I'm able to bring it back to the business in a way that kind of works for them. And so that would be number one, COEs and BPs. If you have them both, they've got to sit in one reporting structure. You have to have one agenda. Two, I don't know. I'm torn on the coordinator operations component. I think ops is the way forward. I think coordinators, coordinators are important from a gatekeeping kind of administrative function. I see a
Mhm.
world where there would be both. I don't think they should be one and the same. And so
Mm.
where I've seen this done really well in a structure probably about 10 years ago was honestly the most efficient structure I've been in. We had an ops team and that was a centralized
Yeah.
team. We had
Yeah.
coordinators that sat within, so decentralized within the orgs, and then, coordinator, generalist, manager, and then the ops team. But ops team was totally responsible for systems. So anybody coming in
Mm.
and out, reporting, responsible for obviously any adjustments, visa, you name it. So any administrative components they were responsible for, which was huge. Rules were so clearly defined. It was clearly your lane, my lane.
Yeah.
There was, the buck stops with somebody. That was super helpful. So again, going back to clarity, like whatever it is, we've got to get it right. The concern is always that each individual piece won't be meaty enough. It's kind of like, well, what are they going to be doing
Yeah.
all day? And I think that mentality is what gets us in this place where you are constantly, chasing the
Yeah.
ball. Like we have to just free them up. We've got to give them some runway and see what they can do. I think with some expectations around soft skills and some expectations around what they are to deliver. But it'll take some experimentation to get there. So yeah.
Mm. Something that's also happened that I've seen, in a couple of HR models that I've been involved in is the moment that we believe we've started solving for some of the efficiency through automation or through technology, we almost start removing layers in the HR complexity line of work. And for me, that is such a mistake because you either pull down on the one side or you leave a void at the bottom. And I think what we should never negate is to follow proper organizational design principles within setting up an HR model. And there has to be clarity around where does what value line, who takes ownership of what. The second component is we don't spend enough time on the tactical design of how does this model work together. It's easy to draw the little triangle. um, I'm going to play devil's advocate. Coming from a COE point of view, my biggest frustration has been working with business partners where I continuously hear, you can never give me a solution because you don't understand the context of the business. And then my response usually is, but that's your role. You have to help me translate what that is. You almost have to play that translator role for the solutions that we want to bring, as much as it's my role to listen to what it is that you require and what it is that you need, wearing the business hat. The other thing that you really mentioned, which I think is super important, is the conflicting priorities that we sometimes do find, because I think in a design that works well, there's healthy tension. And what I mean by that is it's almost the conversation we are having now, right? You say my business is requiring A, B, and C. I tell you the latest development in talent management is some of these approaches. Is that not something that could work? I'm much more interested in what's the latest approach. You are way more interested in what is the approach for my business. That's a healthy tension. The moment that that power relationship shifts either side or either way, that breaks completely, because then it's an existence trying to prove why I'm here, trying to prove my value. COEs then tend to start doing really interesting, very theoretical stuff that nobody uses, but it's very interesting and very time consuming. And business partners I've seen on the other side. Well, to your point, COEs go rogue and business partners go native. I've seen that where the COEs say, I've never spoken to this business partner in the last year. They don't attend my meetings. They don't respond to my requests. We end up avoiding someone. And I think that's so bad for the reputation of HR. I'm very passionate about this because I think there's solid design principles that we recommend the business follows when we're helping them with their business models that we neglect to follow, kind of in our own world, and in our own domain. And I
I
think
think
we
it
need to
goes
blend
back
that
to
a
what
little
you
bit
said,
more.
honestly. Oh, I'm sorry to interrupt. I think it goes
Go
back to
for
what
it,
you
please.
said about, like, we kind of transition the current VP to a new role, to a new title. Like we need to be, again, going back to agree, org design, boxes, design the boxes. What do the boxes require? And then we put them through an interview process, much like we would any other restructure across the org. And we're constantly trying on different hats and lifting and shifting, and we move so and so here. And that's not mobility. I think what we get
Sure.
wrong is we call it mobility. It's not mobility. They don't have the skill set to do that job. But again, goes back to clarity. Do we even know what we're looking for? We can't find what we're looking for if we don't know what we're looking for. So I think that I see that, we're clear on what everyone else is trying to do and how they're trying to get
Yeah.
there. And then within our own function, we really struggle.
I can understand that, right? When there's a, a business that you almost have to that takes core priority first in terms of let's get those structures and setups right. We just never get to doing that for HR. And it's whether it's the org design for HR, whether it's the development. There was a super cool article a while ago that spoke about where have all the CHROs gone, because people have finally realized that you also have to do succession planning for HR. It doesn't just happen, all by itself. So you've kind of mentioned skills quite a bit, and it seems to me as if our conversation starts leading us a lot more towards, but what does that real skill set look like in these different parts and in these different components? So true partnering, talk to me about the skill set that sits behind that.
Yeah. So I think there's a mix of skills and traits. I might talk about them a little bit interchangeably because I think they're important. First of all, EQ. I define EQ as you've got to have, as a VP, like there's got to be some intuition at work here. And I mean that by kind of reading a room, read the proverbial room, and then you've got to be able to find the data to support it. So it's like, it's the hypothesis. I make a hypothesis based on what I've observed, and can I prove it through data? I think like reading the proverbial room. and we have to be comfortable drawing conclusions. I think we wait so
Mm.
long to draw conclusions. I think in the HR space, it's all about, and again, there's some room for this. It's diplomatic. We've got to figure out. To me, it's like we have to observe something, draw a conclusion about it. If we have to pivot and back up, that's fine. The conclusion
Yeah.
can't have irrevocable
Yeah.
consequences. We have to be thoughtful
For
about it.
sure.
But again, I think like a sense of, can you read the room? So to me, going down to testing in, interview process, probably asking some more, self-awareness, demonstrated,
Yeah.
leadership kind of demonstrated skill sets. What have they observed? Why do they think they're important, etc. So more like the critical thinking
Mm.
around the soft skills or people skills, call them what you will. Second, curiosity. So we need to be
Mm.
asking questions. I ask so many questions, and I get in meetings often with people, and everyone's like, that's like a really good question. And it just like, to me, we can't fix the problem unless we understand the problem. I'm all about root
Yeah.
cause,
Spot on.
band-aid solutions. We do so much, I think. And I don't want to, just scotch tape and bubble gum is what I call it.
Yeah.
Bullshit that has to be done. Like root
Yeah.
cause. What is the issue here? And I think that comes down to being able to assess your leadership team. Is it a behavioral gap or is it a competency capability gap? And I think getting a lot more comfortable starting to make those decisions are critical. But in order to do that, we've
Mm.
got to have the
Mm.
data and the support systems in place. So that to me comes with designing, call it a scorecard. What are we
Yeah.
trying to find out? How are we measuring a leader's ability to, agility of the way they operate with their team? How are we measuring, perhaps most importantly, do they get the best out of their team? And if they don't,
Mm.
why is that? To me, you can't tap into somebody, you can't harness talent unless
Yeah.
you know your people. So,
Yeah.
how spot on are they with assessing their folks, and then how are they maximizing and playing to strengths, basically.
Mm.
So that's, I think, vision to me, like an HRBP, we've got to have vision. Can you see the 50,000-foot view? Can you also see the 50-foot view? That is our magic. If you can find a BP that does that, to me, like
Mm.
critical. I know, you have
Yeah.
leaders that are always up here. You've got your detailed people who are always up here. How are you being the glue between the two and basically
Mm.
understanding, I know what this is going to take down here. Here's where we're trying to go. And how are BPs helping either leaders navigate or themselves cutting through the noise? So, like, what are we
Yeah.
focused on? Where are we trying to go? And how are we going to kind of cut through the bullshit that will inevitably kind of crop up? I think that VPs tend to be, again, kind of the more textbook, or they can be, or HR in general. And I think
Yeah.
sometimes you like throw the rule book away and let's get where we're trying to go. So a few other things, obviously, once you have that vision, the courage to act on it. So again, that's
Yeah.
uncomfortable, right? You have to experiment. We have to say, listen, it's okay. This isn't going to go, for our type A people, it's tough. If like, are we going to try it? And if we try it and it fails, okay. I think the solve for this is being really clear in the plan. So to me, it's like, hey, we're going to try X, we're going to try Y, we're going to try Z. Here's the order of it. If it doesn't work, here's a plan B if we have one. If it doesn't work,
Mm.
plan A might be regroup. Whatever it is, just outline kind of the roadmap and make it clear to everyone we're trying this. And if it doesn't work, we're going to pivot. And I think that saves a lot of angst on the business side. It's like, do they know what they're doing? Do they not know? We're like, hey, we're going to give it a go. And if it doesn't stick, it doesn't stick. And I think just expectation setting all around is critical.
Be clear on what is the problem that you're trying to solve, because very often I don't think with the root cause analysis we really get to what is that problem, and then we actually don't set up in a way that's going to solve the real problem. We set up in a way that's going to solve the perceived problem. Your earlier point around data also coming in to help us test certain hypotheses and experimenting with that and being prepared to fail and say, well, this did not work, let me backtrack, try something new, but what did I learn from this, and move on. So it's almost general MVP startup type of principles, but doing that for HR and not trying to be perfect, just trying to be fit for purpose or fit for the period of time where I find myself in. And I think that's such an important skill set to have. Curiosity for me, I think the future of humanity is going to rise and fall on how curious we are about what's happening around us. Because I find a lot of HR professionals get so ingrained in their own world and their own reality, they actually forget that there's a bigger function, bigger organization, bigger world out there. And if we don't remain curious, we are going to be left behind with the speed of what the expectation is of what the HR professional needs to bring, to the table. And to your point, be courageous. I had a CEO that I was the partner team at some stage, and he made such a good statement. He says, something that's frustrated him about HR is we fight so hard to get that proverbial seat at the table and try to speak the language of the business. We sometimes forget the voice we represent at that table and the actual expertise that we bring that nobody else in the room has. And for me, that's almost an identity thing, right? So I see a lot of HR professionals that go so far towards showcasing to them, this is what I can do. This is my business savviness and everything that I have, that they actually forget that they have to bring the integrated view of what does that mean in terms of the people voice and the people capacity within the organization. So love that courageous piece, because I do think we're going to have to step up and be uncomfortable in a couple of conversations, which is not the worst thing in the world. I think to stretch us out of our skin a bit. Alexis, give advice to HR individuals working or listening today, working in the space of business partnering or being interested in that. What do I do tomorrow after listening to us today? What's that first thing that I can do to get started?
I think if in going back to kind of what the business partner is, I think you in partnership with your leader should set the pace for the org. So that is a
Mhm.
huge responsibility. You're setting the pace for the org. I think we have to figure out how, like, what doors do you need to bang on to start to really add value? And you have to determine kind of what that value is. So to me, the best way to start looking at that is what is your business trying to achieve and where are
Mhm.
you today? So obviously data would help that analysis, but I would do a good old SWOT. I'd throw
Yeah.
a SWOT analysis in a doc and basically say, what are our strengths? What are our weaknesses, opportunities? And again, in partnership with your business. And then threats, I think important. And so I would start there. I would assess kind of state of the state. I think we have to start being honest with
Mhm.
ourselves about where we are. We have to start acknowledging where we are. So if you're in a business where you're kind of like, hey, RBPs, I'm super administrative, I want to get into other things, no one's going to hand that to you. Bang on the doors. I think it is my
Yeah.
biggest frustration when the perception is that the business needs to let you know what you're to be doing. You are to collaborate with the business to support and inform the way forward. They should not be the designers if they don't know what we can do. So to me, start to you need to create your own value proposition. So
Mhm.
going back to kind of what you would do, I guess three things. I would put a SWOT analysis or do some analytics, like what does your org need? Um, I would get a people plan in place. I always think it's important to go top down. I think companies don't do this as much as I think they should. I think it should be like CEO priorities, business priorities, HRBP priorities need to be tied into that. So obviously
Yeah.
your OKRs will look different, but making
Mhm.
sure you're tying it back into what that's contributing to and how it's laddering up to the broader objectives is incredibly important. So to me, last thing is track the heck out of your work. I put
Yeah.
everything in a spreadsheet. My goodness. I mean, you've just got to be able to speak to all the things you've done. It helps you get a view of
Yeah.
what you can iterate on. I think that at the end of the year where you're looking, going, what have I done all year when you're in constant kind of swirl, or you can be. I think that the documentation not only helps kind of go back to what you've achieved, it helps you stay focused on the things that you set out to
Mhm.
do. And again, start to cut through some of the noise that inevitably will be the day to day. And so that's where I would start and start assessing what are
Mhm.
you good at? Like what's your special sauce?
Mhm.
For some people, it's the analytics side. Like, how are you using that to your advantage? And to me, biggest thing you can always do is surround yourself the best you can. If you're in a position of, leadership or management, hire a team around you, a balanced team that does the things that you can't do. So acknowledge your strengths, play to your strengths, and then find a team that I think balances you out. Nobody can do it alone. And so I guess those are my
Mhm.
suggestions.
I think that's great. Something I've asked some of my teams to do is to keep track of where you actually spend your time. And I'm not talking about doing a timesheet. I'm saying going back and see over the past month, if these were our five kind of must-win battles, and these were our five things that we said we needed to get right, how much time in the month did you actually spend on that? And what should you stop doing to be able to take certain things off your plate? Because I think we struggle there, in terms of saying, what are the things I need to let go in order to really focus on the things that's going to matter in the longer term? I love the fact that you also spoke about strengths, because I think there's a real opportunity here to shape what business partnering looks like for your business. Yes, with their expectations and the pace and the speed that you've spoken about. But even further than that, and if I can be very honest for a moment, sometimes the bar of what people think HR needs to deliver in an organization is quite low, which you can use to your advantage to say, let me bring something different and let me show you and give you a flavor of what this could look like if we are doing a lot of the things that you and I spoke about today. And I think that's such a great opportunity for anybody starting out or being in an HR role, is to say, how do I authorize myself to do that? I've got a pet peeve with HR professionals that come into the room with this kind of almost questioning their own existence and their value there. That, oh, thank you so much that I'm here today. Thank you so much for making time for us to talk about the people agenda. It is really important. You've already lost the battle there just by showing up in the completely wrong way. If you believe you've got something to say, stand up and say it, have the courage that you've spoken about earlier to be able to do that. Um, Alexis, any last words from your tarmac? And maybe if I can sneak one last question in, let's fast forward to 2035, 2040. Ideal world, what does partnering look like?
I think in a world where it's ideal in all the ways that we've talked about today, we've cleaned up expectations, we're clear around what the roles mean. I mean, you go to an engineering function, it's super clear, right? Machine learning, very
Hmm.
clear what you're to be doing. The systems look different, the programs look different, the approach looks different, but ultimately at the end of the day, the deliverables are clear. So to me, we get to a place where HR is super well defined. HR becomes to me the almost like chief of staff function, not to just you become really that right hand. The CHRO is the true right hand to the CEO, and not brought in when there's a people concern, not brought in
Mm.
when it's just the people agenda. You are co-creating the way forward because you can't do anything without your talent. Data is at a place where we're able to use it, I think, to inform the way forward and add kind of that the human element that I don't believe will ever be replaced by data aggregation. And I think that we're at a place where, like, not only do you have a seat at the table, like you've booked the room for the
Yeah,
the table to sit
love
in
that.
and invited the people that came. You are kind of facilitating and you're the captain of the ship in an enabling way. I would love to start terming us as enablers, not supporters. I think it puts us in the
Mm.
wrong box. Yes, we are a support function. There are a ton of support functions.
Yeah.
We're enablers. We're the unlockers. So how are we tying all the pieces together? We have the unique perspective of the budget kind of behind the scenes. You've got, the detail around talent reviews and what managers have thought about XYZ through the years. And I think understanding of, again, skill sets required. And then to me, that kind of overarching view of cross-functional relationships and culture and political nature and whatever.
Definitely a future to look forward to. And Alexis, a couple of things that stood out from our conversation for me is a difference between being a business partner and partnering with the business, in terms of, not it's not a role, it's an approach, it's a mindset, it's a way of being within the organization. I think you mentioned a couple of really important things around what those models need to look like, and almost where we are shooting ourselves in the foot sometimes with the way of operating today, and that needs to change. Love the fact that we spoke about the courageous HR professional of the future and what some of those new skills look like, utilizing technology, AI, data analytics, etc., but still playing to the strengths that we find in terms of who are you as an individual and what do you bring towards the table. Loved your analogy around, let's book the room, let's become those enablers, let's become the unlockers of value within the organization and real connectors that brings people together, in order to really drive, I think, something a lot better together than we would have been able to do in isolation. Alexis, from my side, thank you very much for sharing your ideas, your thoughts, and your wisdom with us today. And all the best with your role. And we will definitely catch up with you soon.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Perfect. Bye bye, everyone.